Here come the judge. I am the law, and all rise, because today, the Honorable Judge Dave knows that Wrestler Court is in session. For years, the law of the locker room came by means of what is known as Wrestler Court. This was a system where the wrestlers would govern themselves and dispense sentencing in a democratic manner. Now, word has it that Wrestler Court may not be as prevalent as it once was, but there was a time when it served as the final word on the scales of wrestler justice. So what exactly is Wrestler Court? Well, let's start at the tragic beginning. In 1988, famed wrestler Bruiser Brody got into a heated argument with Jose Huertas Gonzalez. The two were in the shower area of an arena locker room when this incident took place, and during the argument, Bruiser Brody was stabbed in the stomach. Due to the crowded nature of the venue, paramedics were not able to reach Brody in time, and ultimately he died of his wounds. Gonzalez was subsequently acquitted for the murder, claiming self-defense. This incident and the court proceedings that followed have been extremely criticized by many, even to this day. Now, one source close to the incident was wrestler Dutch Mantell, known to many fans today as Zeb Coulter. He decided that something had to be done. Dutch believed that this tragedy never needed to happen in the first place, and something like this should never happen again. And seeing how many felt that the legal system had failed, it was only logical to want to take matters into their own hands. Therefore, Dutch Mantell created Wrestler Court, where if any individuals had a grievance with one another, no matter how big or small, they would air their issues in front of the entire locker room, so that a peaceful solution could be found. Dutch Mantell eventually took this concept to the WWE along with him, and he was in the company long before he was ever Zeb Coulter, just for the record. Now bear in mind that wrestling is still a very secretive business, and for a long time, Wrestler Court was not something for public knowledge. It was just an insider understanding that what happens in the locker room stays in the locker room. But even though we, the people, know about Wrestler Court now, that doesn't mean that we know everything there is to know about it. So while several stories do exist as public knowledge, there are still plenty of details that elude wrestling fans and may continue to elude wrestling fans forever. Not only that, but since many of these stories are passed down through hearsay, as is usually the case, there is always the chance that some things have been reported differently by different sources. With all that being said, here are just a few details and stories from Wrestler Court. In the WWE locker room, the judge of Wrestler Court was usually The Undertaker. And why not? If there was ever a guy who could command respect and deserved it too, well, who else would it be but the Phenom? However, he was not always available, in which case it has been reported that other veterans such as Triple H would occasionally step in. Now, the courtroom structure would go further than this, as there was also a prosecution and a defense. The prosecution was usually JBL, and the defense was anyone willing to step up to the plate. And in terms of crime and punishment, well, that's where things could get a little bit interesting. And they did. Here are just some stories. Edge and Christian had an interesting strategy when it came to building their careers. They figured the best way to get booked good was to get in good with booking. So they bought some gifts for WWE Creative with the hopes that they might see some positive effects in their direction. Now, according to Hardcore Holly, this is expressly forbidden in their contract, and therefore had to be taken to Wrestler Court. The Undertaker found them guilty, and they were sentenced with buying alcohol for The Undertaker, Hardcore Holly, and the APA, which could definitely add up. Johnny from the Spirit Squad was not the most respectful of rookies. He was caught mouthing off about how he didn't care for starting his career out as a mere tag team wrestler. JBL heard this and he was offended by it and took him to Wrestler Court. Johnny was sentenced with having to buy beer for Bradshaw and to watch tapes of old tag team matches in order to get him to learn a thing or two about appreciating tag team wrestling. Muhammad Hassan was not liked backstage, allegedly having an attitude problem, coupled with his major push that he was receiving while still being fairly new to the business. Now, in true WWE fashion, Hassan was given the camel clutch as his finisher. Then during one night, Hassan saw Eddie Guerrero using the move as a weird down hold. Hassan got in Eddie's face, irate about his finisher being undermined. But unfortunately for him, Hassan didn't know his history, because the move was originally called the horse mounting choke, and it was invented by Gory Guerrero, Eddie's father. The incident was taken to Wrestler Court, and Hassan was fined by having to pay a several $1,000 bar tab that the wrestlers racked up later on that night. Matt Hardy definitely needed to be woken after this next incident. One night during an overseas tour, he was drunk at a bar. very drunk. Eve Torres, who was still a backstage interviewer at the time, not an in-ring competitor yet, was play fighting with him a little bit. Now keep in mind, Torres has legitimate martial arts training, and at one point, she sunk her hooks into him for a rear naked choke. And before you knew it, Matt Hardy could be heard snoring as he passed out, sound asleep. Hardy was taken to wrestler court for public drunkenness. His sentence? The Undertaker and a lot of the boys just made fun of him for a while. As a newcomer, The Miz was about as hated in the locker room as he was by fans. So when he managed to offend a veteran of the ring, justice would definitely be swift. The Miz was eating chicken in the back and got some crumbs into the bag of Chris Benoit. The Miz was taken to wrestler court and was found guilty. His sentence was being banned from the locker room, which meant that he had to change anywhere else, including public restrooms and hallways. However, several months later, and the Chris Benoit incident would happen. Now the rule was, the man who kicks you out of the locker room has to be the one to invite you back in. Now clearly, this was never going to happen. Miz didn't know what to do, so he just kept changing outside the locker room. Allegedly, it was The Undertaker who took note of the situation and brought The Miz back in. Goldberg has been heavily criticized by many smarks for not being able to wrestle, and this incident doesn't help his case. Now this all started back in WCW. Chris Jericho's stock was rising fast, and Jericho wanted to work an angle with Bill Goldberg, who was another quick rising star in the company and was on top of the world at that time. Now Goldberg would only do the angle if he was allowed to completely squash Jericho. Y2J was not having that. Then when both men came to the WWE, Goldberg was talking to Kevin Nash, stating that Jericho wasn't big enough to be a credible threat to him. Jericho had had enough, and the two got into a real-life fight, with Jericho slapping Goldberg into a front face lock and taking him down, holding him there for several minutes while Goldberg was helpless to do anything about it. It took several wrestlers to get Jericho to finally break the hold. Afterwards, it was Goldberg who took Jericho to wrestler court over the incident, but Judge Triple H ruled in Jericho's favor, deeming that Goldberg had no respect. Goldberg had to apologize to Jericho and openly admit that Jericho was the better wrestler. And now on to more recent times. As stated, many claim that wrestler court is a thing of the past in the WWE. Supposedly, wrestler behavior is a lot different now than it once was, and therefore the need for wrestler court is no more. However, as a total about-face to that statement, Enzo Amore was kicked out of the locker room for obnoxious behavior and living his gimmick a little too much. This resulted in him being thrown out of the locker room by Roman Reigns. Yo, seriously Roman? Stop trying to steal the Undertaker shtick, okay? You can't pull it off, and you never will. Now, many of the guilty parties in wrestler court cases were said to have learned humility and how it taught them about being respectful to their fellow wrestlers. But do we still need something like that now? Let me know in the comments what you think about wrestler court and if it should still be a thing. And please be like Shockwave1209 and support me over on Patreon. Thank you, Shockwave1209, and thank you for watching this episode of Dave Knows.